Well, the more that countries around the world talk about climate change, the more nuclear energy seems to enter the discussion. In Australia, the prospect of building nuclear power plants remains a tough sell politically. But in the former Soviet Republic of Lithuania, the nuclear debate is played out in a very different way. There, the population overwhelmingly supports nuclear power. But the country's only nuclear plant was closed anyway. And the impact goes far beyond higher electricity prices. Moscow correspondent Norman Hamont reports from Lithuania.
The fuel is gone from the reactor, and the work of closing this nuclear power station goes on. The days of generating power for more than 1 million homes are over here. In the control room, technicians are still on duty, monitoring a mix of modern Western and Soviet-era technology. This plant is still technically in operation, but it's not producing electricity. There's not much to do but watch as livelihoods fade away.
Well, there are certainly not many positive emotions. It's only recently that the station worked and produced electric energy. Now we have been transformed into a huge consumer of electric energy, and it is not quite clear how long this sort of work will be maintained here.
Closing the Ignalina nuclear power plant was the price Lithuania paid for joining the European Union. Its reactors were similar to the type that exploded at Chernobyl. After years of planning, the last unit shut down when 2010 began. In the nearby town of Visaginas, purpose-built by Soviet planners to house the plant's workers, there is uncertainty about the future. Vladimir Vashila worked at Ignalina for 27 years before losing his job. People here, he says, are angry.
Well, in general, yes. Especially those who work at the station, or at least their job is linked to the station. Because the station didn't just generate electricity, it indirectly, through its contracts, was feeding the economy all around Lithuania. And all of Lithuania is starting to feel that.
Lithuania was the opposite of a nuclear protest state. Ignalina provided 70% of the country's power, and most people wanted it to stay open. In a referendum, more than 90% voted to keep it running. But nothing could stop the shutdown. Even those in charge acknowledge that what they are doing will not win them any popularity contests.
Frankly speaking, a lot of people still believe that it was not worth to do, but as you know, we deal with what has been decided, and that cannot be changed and cannot be reverted back. So we have a fact which we are working on.
So, with more than $1 billion of EU money, this station is coming apart, piece by piece.
Decommissioning a plant like this is a very long and painstaking process. It's not only the fuel rods that have been removed from this reactor that need treatment for high radiation levels. It's also the pipes, the turbines, any of the machinery used in the plant also has to be treated. They'll be decommissioning this plant for the next 25 to 30 years.
Most of the equipment and machinery, classified as low-level radioactive waste, will be stored for the next half-century in a new building near the plant. As for the spent fuel, it could be highly radioactive for perhaps 1,000 years. Environmental groups say nuclear waste is just one reason why closing Ignalina was the right move, even if it remains an unpopular decision.
We think that the nuclear is dangerous, and it creates a lot of other problems, like from an environmental point of view, the management of the spent fuel and radioactive waste. It's very expensive business and very dangerous.
But those arguments carry no weight for those still working here. They say this plant had a flawless safety record and could have kept running for decades. For many, it's the only job they've ever known.
We've been working here for 25 years, and to find yourself in such a position before retirement, many people had turned out to be unemployed. They were laid off. We stayed, but we don't know either. Maybe in a year or two, we will also be laid off.
Or sooner. Employment here is falling by the month. Soon, little more than a skeleton staff will remain. But Lithuania isn't giving up on nuclear power. The great hope is it can convince some of its neighbors, such as Poland and Latvia, to help it pay for new reactors. Those doing the shutting down here hope they can do the building.
Of course, everyone understands that nuclear energy is much cheaper. Of course, it has its own consequences.
As for the consequences, anyone who's visited one of these plants doesn't need a reminder. Our equipment is scanned for traces of radiation, and so are we.
No contamination.
Here, such checks are not a cause for fear. They're a part of everyday life that most don't want to see end. Norman Hermont, Late Line.